Well, I'm president of Central Region, CSCA, which is the largest geographic region, maybe even now the largest part of CSCA. Stretches from Canada to Pennsylvania, 440,000 some odd members, 200 units and locals. My own activity in CSCA started in the 60s, late 60s, when we, before the Taylor Law existed, and being a union activist on the work site was an experience. The management did not recognize in any fashion collectively the employees speaking together as a group. And then we, of course, saw the Taylor Law come into being, and things really did improve. There was a lot of equalization that occurred overnight at the table, so that we were equal with the director of a facility or the president of a college or the director of a hospital, and those were good times, exciting times. My own activity started as a steward at Utica Psychiatric Center, late 60s, early 70s. Went on to be elected president of my local at the Psychiatric Center, 1,000 members. Ran for the statewide board of directors in the early 70s, was elected in 1972 to my first slot on the board of directors. 1977, I was elected president of the region, and I've held that position ever since.
About the longest of anybody, right?
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm probably the senior member on the board of directors by far.
Well, let me go back to the beginning. What's your first recollection of CSCA? When did you first hear about CSCA?
Heard about CSCA the first day I started to work. Actually, I was approached by a union steward to sign a membership card. I had not heard of the union before I went to work for the state, and within a day or so he came back and asked me what I had thought I was going to do. I signed the card, and within a couple weeks dues started being taken out of my check. That was in 1965. I waited 2 or 3 years to get active with the union. I don't exactly remember what did it. I think there was some individual issue that occurred on the wards. At that time, deinstitutionalization was just starting to come forth. Rockefeller was the governor. Wilson was the governor for 6 months after that. And thousands of people were being dumped. Well, obviously, I was working in one of those facilities. So I had an interest in stopping that deinstitutionalization. And probably that, more than anything else, prompted me to become active in the union.
Was it a union then, by then, or was it still an association?
It was called an association, but in my mind, it was certainly a union. It was a pretty reputable union. Either Feely or Wenzel was president of at that point. I think probably the transition was just occurring from Joe Feely to Ted Wenzel. I had become upset with a contract that was negotiated after the Taylor Law, and thought that we could have done better. And somehow, I don't remember exactly how, but I got myself appointed to the next negotiating team. And I joined that negotiating team with great expectations, and quickly found out that when you're trying to negotiate for 40,000 people, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And I was a member of that first team. There were 12 of us in the 70s, and 4 years later I was appointed to the next negotiating team, and actually moved up like a little step within the negotiating team, and then eventually served as chairman of the institutional bargaining unit, which represented about 45,000 CSCA members. I was chair of that negotiating team. That was a good experience. Came from all over the state, met in Albany. I think that we brought in some good contracts in those years too. We had money in each year. We had a lot of catching up to do. At that time, we had no permanent pension benefits, and every year we used to have to go to the Senate and the Assembly and the governor and beg to have our permanent pension benefits. And that always really pissed me off, that they would demean us that way. We had a huge demonstration one year. Mary Ann Krupczak was lieutenant governor, I can remember. And basically we achieved our permanent pension benefits 4 or 5 years after that. That was an important step. It was a union. There were officers, there were training programs. Early on, there was a guy named Ed Diamond that headed our education and training department, and he used to try to convince Ted Wenzel that it was in the best interest of the union to train union stewards. there was always a bit of a controversy whether the activists should be trained or that kind of thing should be done by the staff of the union, and a lot of us really believed that that was an activist role.
Yeah.
We had some really exciting times in the 70s and 80s. You know, with the affiliation now approaching its 25th year, I can remember back when Jerry Worf's brother Al basically headed a group that had been formed by AFSCME. It was called Council 50, and it was basically a New York State affiliate that was formed, I believe, to go after the CSEA units that at that time AFSCME thought was vulnerable. And it was kind of a love-hate relationship, basically. I personally had had an opportunity to read a couple of books that Jerry Worf had written, and books that were written about AFSCME. I always held AFSCME in high regard. I didn't hold them in high regard when they were trying to challenge us, and I obviously backed up CSEA. I remember a confrontation between myself and Jerry's brother Al at a psychiatric center, basically, where the employees were being asked to choose between CSEA and AFSCME at that point. This is years before the affiliation. And we come out okay. We had lost our PS&T unit, which absolutely triggered the need to join some international union. That was tough for us. Much of our board of directors at that time were made up of PS&T members. I'd say probably 25–30% of the board of directors. And losing the PS&T was a big void.
Sure. Now let's go back a minute, because people talk to me about presidents, but I haven't heard much about Feely. Did you know much about him?
I knew, I had met him. Feely was, I believe, also a PS&T state employee.
What was he like?
Well, all I did was see him in action.
Yeah. Heard things.
He was very similar to Ted Wenzel.
Oh, was he?
Very similar. In fact, I think the two of them actually probably got along fairly well together. Kind of guy that I don't think related well to rank and file DOT workers, mental hygiene workers. Kind of an Albany-based fellow.
Pretty much the old CSEA.
I'd say so. I'm sure that's what actually it was not much of a change when Ted Wenzel came in.
Yeah. Well, you got to know him better.
I got to know him quite well.
How would you characterize him?
Bit of a stuffed shirt. Again, not easily comfortable, I don't think, with a lot of our rank and file members. But he did bring a professionalism to the job that I respected. Well-credentialed. I can remember I used to go to the board of director meetings in the early 70s, and Ted was the president of CSEA at that time. And he really was more towards the end of his career than the beginning of his career. And I can remember he used to fall asleep sometimes. He would sit up in front at the board meeting and he'd fall asleep. And honest to God, I was at that point, I was like 26, 27, 28 years old, and I thought we had to change the world, you know, and I'd scream at him, you know, wake up, for Christ's sake, we're paying you $30,000 a year, you know? And he would wake up, and the two of us politically never really got it on. He did give me my appointment letter to the first negotiating team, which I appreciate, but after that it kind of ceased. I was a strong advocate of Bill McGowan, who at that time was emerging within the union. Bill, I thought, would give us the entry into the House of Labor, which I thought was overstated. I think probably we wouldn't have lost our PS&T unit if we had affiliated 3 or 4 years before that. It divided the union, something terrible. No, Wenzel was a character. It was the right time, the right place, but it allowed us to get through pretty much that hiatus in the 70s that so many of the unions that were there now are no longer even in existence.
Yeah, could have happened here. Yeah. So McGowan, you got to know him.
McGowan, very well. Traveled together, supported him from first day that he indicated he was willing to be president. Respected him.
Yeah, you must have some stories.
Oh, a lot of stories. A lot of stories. Oh, really?
Oh, come on.
I didn't expect that today.
Oh, yeah.
No. A lot of stories. I'd have to really, you try to, they always, you know, as the decades go by, the stories are embellished.
Yeah, they get better and better.
Yeah, and that's not what I want to do.
Okay.
There were 4 or 5 of us in the 70s that did a lot with Bill McGowan. I think he kind of relied on us a lot too. There was the issue of mental hygiene and deinstitutionalization, and Bill mounted a tremendous campaign against that. I think probably better than any president in any union in the country at that particular time. Dorothy King was president from Region 2. Her son Ron now is the region director in Region 1. Betty Duffy was a name out of the past that you simply can't ever talk about CSEA's history without talking about. Bill McGowan, myself, Elaine Moutry was an activist from Region 6. And there was Ron Smith from Willowbrook. At that point, we hadn't gone through the Willowbrook consent decree, and there were 4,000 employees that worked at Willowbrook. In mental hygiene, when we would have meetings at the conventions and stuff, there were 700 or 800 CSEA delegates alone for mental hygiene. Bob Giles was a CBS, a staff member that worked with us through the 70s, the early 80s. Yeah, there's some really good stories. The issue of the law firm and the division within CSEA, that's a story in itself that we probably could and should spend some time on. Myself and another staff member were basically asked by Bill McGowan to coordinate the transformation of going from a union that was an awful lot controlled by our attorneys, way too much. In fact, that became an issue the last year of Jerry Worth's existence, and that was a very, probably the most difficult thing that I have ever done within the union.
So what did you have to do? What did you do?
Ooh, what did we do? It took months. There was a concerted effort where the union was really pitted. It wasn't the issue of whether to have in-house counsel versus an outside law firm. It was basically the issue of who's going to control the union. Is it going to be elected officials or is it going to be others? And that was a year-long project that took a lot of effort and took a lot out of those of us that really became involved in it. It's probably something we should almost talk about maybe someday in the future.
Okay.
Yeah.
We could talk about anything today.
Sure.
Whatever
other than that.
Anything other than that?
Yeah, probably.
We've talked about it with other people. We're getting everybody's point of view on it. And all of this stays inside here, you know. Nothing
Oh, I
else.
know that. It's just that it really is, it's a very traumatic time period. There's so much involved in it, it's just unbelievable.
Maybe you could write a book.
Yeah, maybe I should.
All right.
After 32 years, I'm sure there's enough material.
Oh, I'm
That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so now you've been involved with AFL-CIO too, right? You did something.
Yeah, actually, when we originally bought into the concept of paying full per capita, which at the time was certainly something novel, NYSET, for the most part in New York State, one of the few unions that have ever done that. I was approached by a labor council in the Utica area. It was the Central New York Labor Council. Actually, the most continuous labor council in the country goes back to the old, Labor, House of Labor, Labor Congress, et cetera. And they were kind of floundering, and I was approached to be president of it, which I really didn't want to give up another, what I thought would be 6 or 7 days or nights a year. It ended up being maybe 30. But I assumed the presidency of that for a 1-year period. Enjoyed it, saw that we were benefiting the workers in the Mohawk Valley, including CSEA members. Took it for another year, took it for another term, and kept it for 4 years. Probably helped reestablish the council to a thriving labor council in New York State. It's well respected. We have staff, we have goals, we're meeting our goals. And then last December I announced that I was just going to step down and kind of move away from that. Our own particular problems in CSEA since November of last year have been mounting day by day. In my own region, we have had literally hundreds of announced layoffs in our county units, in our cities, in our state. And I felt it was better to come back and just spend the time with the region job that I'm elected to do,
Yeah.
which is, I certainly support the AFL-CIO in New York State.
Oh, yeah.
I want to make sure we're getting the best bang for the buck, and I haven't made up my mind on that yet, and probably won't for a year down the road. If I felt that the money that we were paying them was inappropriate or not resourceful, I would be the first to advocate reducing our per capita.
Now, you've got a history, obviously, with CSEA. Have you ever seen anything like this before, what's happening now with layoffs?
Yeah, 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Basically, it's all counter-cyclical. It really is.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get with
We went through it 3 times with Mario Cuomo.
Yeah.
There were 3 periods during the state when Mario Cuomo chose to lay off, which I always thought was rather ironic, that this big liberal that was supposed to be labor's best friend and really turned out to be a royal pain in the goddamn ass.
Yeah.
I think the entire time that he was in as governor, real phony. We made it through that. We had to muster our efforts. We've had times, like I said, with the deinstitutionalization issue, we've had times, the entire Northeast is not really ever, even through Bill Clinton's 5 of the 8 years, that so many of the other states in the country have bounced back and have enriched their situation. We, in the Northeast, I mean, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, we've all been in trouble for the past 8 or 9 years or so, and that's hurting us right now. The inability for county legislators to stand up and go for a tax increase when it means saving jobs, even though the services that our members provide are so warranted by the taxpayers of the various counties.
I know. You think they'd look back and see it.
Yeah.
But
It's our job as a union, and that's our job, is to do that kind of thing, is to be there for the members, to fight the layoffs, to stop the privatization. I think the hardest part as a union activist is staying charged up so that day in and day out, something that is not new to me, but is extremely frightening to a new local president or a unit president or even a staff member of CSEA, it's really no big deal. There's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of preliminary work that has to be done. You lay the groundwork and you just get it done. If it takes a couple weeks to do it, you do it. If it takes 24 hours a day, you do it. It's as simple as that.
Are there new people coming up?
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of my region. I've got, I mean, CSEA in its totality is a wonderful union. I would pit my region against any region in the state. I'm proud of my region. We've just launched into a new program. It's called Member Action Mobilization, and we have 40,000 members in our region, and we set a goal that within 2 years we would reach out to at least 1% of that 40,000 people, get them to buy into the concept of helping each other out. If you work in a state facility and the city of Utica is not having a contract negotiated, then there's nothing wrong with you being there on a demonstration line, on a picket line, 5 o'clock on July 15th or something like that. And within 3 months, we have already signed up 1.5%. We're up over 500 people. That's a plus. Our region has wonderful regional committees. Our women's committee, we've had a commitment to community service for the past 3 years. We've raised money for breast cancer research. We had a library in our inner city in Syracuse that was an extremely poor school district. We raised $7,000 or $8,000 for the library. We just launched our activities into the Civil Rights Movement program, which is a program sponsored by Nancy Lorraine Hoffman, working with youths. In the youth, sounds like my cousin Vinny there. Youths of Syracuse. So we have a good region. We do our share of keeping this union going.
Good. It's got a great history, and it's great to talk to you. Let's look at your career, which is a good long one and still going on, of course. But what are you most proud of so far?
Most proud of.
Yeah,
somehow, I guess, most proud of. I guess just the number of activists that have come from my region.
Yeah.
Mary Sullivan was one of my regional officers. She's now a statewide executive vice president. Maureen Malone was the individual I put on McGowan's committee to study the affiliation. She's our statewide treasurer. I walked a picket line with Barbara Reeves during the strike 1972, I think it was. She's our statewide secretary. A lot of staff people in my region right now. I'd say of our labor relations specialists, probably 60–70% of them came from rank and file members. Many of the folks that came up in the past 25 years from my region have gone on to work for AFSCME, for AFT. Lou Naiman's over at AFT. And quite a few of the activists have gone on to work for AFSCME, other unions in the country. I guess that's it, the legacy that we're spreading out.
Yeah, nice.
It is, very, very comfortable with that. But tremendous support. My wife has been a real supporter for, God, 35 years. And if you're really worried about staying that extra 2 hours to finish a meeting up at night, you can't do this job. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year. Resented the time away from my son. Now he's 25 years old with his own job. I would have liked to see him gone into a job with a union. He's heading a laboratory in a cyberspace terrorism computer outfit.
Okay.
He's happier than hell, and I'm kind of pleased to that.
Good stuff.
No union for him, which is okay.
Yeah, not until he needs it.
Yeah.
What are you most disappointed by?
Most disappointed
Yeah.
in terms of like the last
Whole
32
career.
years?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
well.
know one thing you said, you should have probably joined AFSCME sooner.
Yeah, but that's so, I mean, that's trivial in terms
Yeah.
of the last 32 years of New York State.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I've always been a guy that looks at the cup as half full.
Mhm.
There isn't an awful lot of disappointments. To tell you the truth, I know that on any given day you can be disappointed about something that you've worked on that's not going to come to
Yeah.
be, but life's too short to worry about that shit.
Good. Most important
Forgot
events.
the tape was going.
This is all for right in here. What do you see as the most important events during your time? in office?
Most important events, the restructuring of CSEA, A. Victor Costa and his restructuring of CSEA, which I was a delegate to those conventions. Tremendous ability, established the regions, established full-time statewide officers' positions, which I think has been very, very, very good for CSEA. Restructuring was definitely established all the region offices, brought in extra staff, specialized some of the staff in terms of the union. I think one of the highlights has been the establishment of an in-house council that works for us.
Yeah.
To be very candid, I made no bones about the fact that I really did not respect what was going on with Romer and Featherstone Hall. I thought it was a terrible misuse of their position, and I blame Bill McGowan for allowing it to go on too soon, for too long. I'm glad that he finally stepped up to the plate. I can remember how frustrated Jerry Worf was when that was going on. I can remember an officers' meeting that Worf came to just weeks before he died. And I can remember sitting as an officer in that meeting where we discussed the very issue of the in-house attorneys versus the other setup that we had going. The highlights have also been the professionalism of our rank and file activists and leaders. We do a pretty good job of training our people and preparing them once they're elected to serve the members. I'm very proud of that. I think our political action department has demonstrated throughout the country that we can impact on elections, that we can help remove people that are against CSEA, and we can get people elected that are pro-CSEA. I attended, ironically, I'll tell you something that maybe could be deemed disappointing. I've been, when I got out of school, I registered as a Republican, to be very candid. I did that for several reasons. Two that come to mind real quick is that I really respected what the Republican Party did in forming itself on the slavery issue. I always respected that and thought that Abraham Lincoln and what the folks in those years did was outstanding. I also respected Nelson Rockefeller. He was a moderate Republican, and I thought that he was treating state employees with respect, built the state university system. So I've always been a registered Republican. That has not been easy in this business of being a unionist. Two things come to mind real quick. I can remember being at Harvard. I was the first CSEA person to go to the Harvard Trade Union program on the Jerry Worf Scholarship, which I was very proud that I did that. And I can remember calling a good buddy of mine, a guy named Sherry Bullard, he's a congressman, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and one of the papers I was working on was talking about the Democratic versus Republican Party and their involvement with labor unions. And honest to God, I was really having a hard time. I mean, I don't vote Republican, I vote for the individual. I always have done that, I will continue to do that. But that's been frustrating to me, is the fact that the Republican Party has not reached out to organized labor. And I think it's a shame, and I think they should do that. I went to Houston as a delegate to the Republican convention in 1992. And I can remember having a conversation with George Bush. I had an opportunity through then the controller of the state of New York set up a meeting. And I wanted to support George Bush, to be very, very candid. At that time, certainly Bill Clinton was on the rise and blah, 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 blah. I kind of did not, I was not enamored with Bill Clinton in the early 90s, to be very candid. I thought the guy was a real phony, to be very candid. But I can remember sitting across from a table from George Bush and asking him what his position was going to be on the Family Leave Act, because it was crucial to me. I had felt that no woman should ever have to give up their current job or future promotion based on the fact that they took time off to have a child. And when George Bush said to me that he did not feel it would be in the best interest of the country to sign that bill, and I remember walking out, shaking his hand, wishing him well, and walking out of that meeting in Houston, going back to my hotel, and I left the next morning. I just felt, even though my way was paid by AFSCME, which I think is important, that we be represented at Democratic and Republican conventions, there was no way I was going to support George Bush after his position on that legislation. Family Leave Act is something that I think is very beneficial, and I think this union and AFSCME certainly played a role in getting that legislation passed. Ironically, Clinton turned out to be less of a hypocrite than I thought. He was generally right, except for NAFTA, on union positions, and he was all right. Going back, I can't remember the first president. I remember it was either Jimmy Carter or Mondale, I think, was his vice president, that I may have met in my capacity as a union activist. God, it's going back, but that's always been a big plus, having CSEA represented in international and national affairs. Harvard Trade Union program was a real coup. It was unbelievable. At that time, it was a 3.5-month program. It's been cut down now to 30 days, I think, basically. But actually moved to Boston and lived in Boston, lived in the dorms. Great opportunity.
Let's talk about some of the people we haven't mentioned. You mentioned Costa.
A. Victor, right?
Give me
Character.
like a little picture of him.
Spunky, intelligent, very, very forward-thinking. Envisioned what CSEA could be and should be. Never had an opportunity to really transcribe that for personal gain. He ran for office a couple times. I don't think he was ever a regional president. I know he was never. I don't think he was he may have been a statewide officer under the old setup before their restructuring, but whether he had a desire to or not, but he certainly impacted this union by getting restructuring through. I can remember as a delegate supporting it, very much so. Outstanding guy, outstanding guy.
What about McDermott? We didn't talk much about him.
Well, we haven't talked much about McDermott. It's ironic. A lot of people for, 15 years saw Joe McDermott and I probably impact on this union. Probably impacted as much on this union, even though we weren't, at that time, statewide officers. We were region presidents. We had virtually no differences on major issues. Both of us believed in education and training. Both of us believed in negotiations as strongly as we could. Joe and I were on the board of directors together, and we really, I think, brought a lot of the changes about in this union, helped to bring a lot of the changes about in this union. Two of us would meet every 2 weeks for lunch halfway in Schenectady or Amsterdam or Fultonville. Tremendous. I had a tremendous amount of respect for him. I suspect he did for me also. That came to an abrupt change when both of us came down on different sides of the issue with the attorneys. And that's why I was alluding to the fact that perhaps that's another issue for another taping. That basically, just separated us tremendously. Joe advocated the retention of Romer and Feathers. I felt very strongly that they had to go. Ended up running. I probably wouldn't have run against Joe McDermott for president if it hadn't been for that issue. I probably would have just come up underneath or run for something else. But Joe and I had just polarized the issue so strongly. I think the election, I was close. I think it was less than 4,000 votes that I lost by. But in retrospect, it probably, for me, when I have seen the amount of time that McDermott had to give up and what Donahue has had to give up, I doubt if I really could have remained active in any kind of family life or anything else if I had gotten it. It's ironic. It's something I've run for, president of CSEA. It's funny with so much of the things now in the last 5 or 6 years that have come to me. I'm at a stage in my life where I obviously know I'm closer to the end of my career than the beginning, and I don't look for anything at this point. I take every day as a gift, and I know that I'm productive. I know that I'm beneficial to the union, and I don't strive for anything other than what I have now. I think I'm probably more comfortable with myself than I've ever been in my life.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah, it's like it's there. It's like,
it's good.
Yeah.
It's all good, as they say.
Absolutely.
One more question. What do you think, what lessons does CSEA's history hold for the future of CSEA?
Well, CSEA, I have found my 32 years in CSEA to be, we don't necessarily always do the right thing for the right reasons, but damn, we've got a pretty good success rate in the ultimate decision making and the outcome. We have kept pace in this country, in this country's labor movement, with any international union, with any local union, with any unaffiliated union. We're going to make that 100 years, and this union is going to be stronger than it is today. And I think that we have learned from our history, and I think that there's no major event, every event, the Taylor Law, supporting governors, OSHA, very, very important to our people. The reconstruction of CSEA, I mean, you could come up with a list of probably 30 things over the past years. Excuse me. No one individual issue or individual has or ever will impact on this union. It's collectively a union. It was started by a handful of people because they thought they needed one. And I think that that history will keep this union propelling to the future.